And with me now is the former United States Director of National Intelligence, Dennis C. Blair. Thank you for joining us today. My first question to you would be, as someone who served with the military of the world's superpower for more than 3 decades, what are your thoughts on this global movement of moderate, and can it be spearheaded by a country as small as Malaysia?
Well, it's the right cause, I think, because based on my experience, the sort of extremist voices have been nothing but trouble for the world at large, and so those who speak out about doing things in a more moderate fashion, which I think is in line with what most citizens of most countries want, is very valuable. As far as Malaysia being a leader, it can certainly be a catalyst, and the more participants and other countries and groups that join in, the better. But I think things like this can start anywhere, and I really hand it to Prime Minister Najib for making a start and putting his personal effort behind it, and things like this conference. So yeah, it can take off from here, sure.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the concept of moderation now. It's not new, but in times of war, can moderation be applied, and if yes, how so?
Well, it's better to start earlier, before the war before the war starts. With the I think where extremism has its power is when situations turn bad, people feel oppressed, desperate, or hopeless. Then these simplistic, often hateful explanations seem attractive. They seem a way out, and I think that what those who believe in moderation should do is before that stage should find ways for people to be able to improve the situations they find themselves in without resorting to violence and hatred and bigotry, which are the coin of extremism, and then inspire them to make changes in peaceful ways before that happens. Another time, of course, that movements like this can be powerful, I think, is after wars, when people when people sort of look at what has happened, they think, boy, that was a pretty lot of suffering and damage done that way. Can't we move forward in a more common way? So I think you see things like the United Nations was established after World War II, right. and so on. I think, but I think there's no bad time to start something like this, and I think that we've seen. I think probably we've seen the cresting of the one extremist violent movement that has been in the news recently, the Al-Qaeda movement of the last 10 years or so. According to all the data that's available, its popularity is going down. People are realizing that this killing of innocent people is not either morally justified or making any progress. So I think people are looking for something different. So this offers, I think, something different.
Right. We'll talk about Al-Qaeda in just a little bit, but first I'd like to ask, what would you say have been some of the toughest decisions or challenges in your role as Director of National Intelligence?
Oh, let's see. As toughest older thing, I think the role of intelligence is really to inform a nation's most important national security decisions. So what you worry about is making sure that the intelligence you're giving to the President or to the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense is number one, true and accurate, and number two, it's helpful to them in making those decisions, because they really rely on their intelligence director and their intelligence apparatus to give them a sense for situations that they don't have personal knowledge of, that they haven't spent a lot of time on. So you really feel that real sense of responsibility to get it right, and you have a lot of help, experts, analysts who have been working on these things for years, and to try to guide them in the right direction so that they can give our policymakers a sense of the situation is on the ground is the real underlying challenge of it.
Right. Now, according to some research that we've done, actually, we'll just stop for a little bit.
Can you hold it for a
But
second?
my question was going to be, you once said that the intelligence community must conduct analysis on opportunity as well as threats. I'm going to ask you to elaborate.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We're still rolling, yeah? Okay. So according to our research, you once said that the intelligence community must conduct analysis on opportunities as well as threats. Could you elaborate on what you meant?
Yeah, the traditional role of intelligence is to say this is a threat to national interest, such and such a country may be getting ready to attack an ally of ours, or a group to make an attack on America or not. But I think equally important are to look at a situation and say these are the areas in which the United States, or in the case of other countries, their intelligence officials say, if we were to take an action, we could make a positive difference. So situations like when situations where North Korea seems like a hopeless situation. So I would challenge my analysts to think what are the things that the United States could do not to because of a fear of a North Korean attack,
right.
but what are things that could be done to help the North Korean people. So a lot of it has to do with looking for ways to help when situations just seem bad, but when an initiative would make a difference.
So would you then say that intelligence plays an important role then in something like the GMM?
Yes, I think that it could help direct where the opportunities are where the greatest. It could help identify. Another thing that intelligence is good at is sort of keeping track of what's happened in the past and present that in a dispassionate manner. So it can provide information on what has worked in the past, what hasn't worked so well, where the opportunities are. So when you use the word intelligence, it has sort of a government sinister fashion to it. But I think if you think of it, intelligence, small I, in terms of just trying to think of the situation through and to have a clear understanding of it, it can be very helpful for things like GMM.
Let's talk a little bit about the past. Last year we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks.
Right.
Do you think that extremism is still very much prevalent today, or are we living under a false sense of security now that we've gone past it 10 years?
Right. I think that there always is the potential of violent acts inspired by extremist doctrines, and we, and I'm talking not just the United States, but all countries who are the targets of extremist violence, are not going to be safe until we really change the overall atmosphere about these groups, so that it's not considered. Mothers and fathers of young people don't think it's a good idea if their children go join a group and go blow themselves up, but they look for different ways to handle the world's problem. So I think that we can continue with security forces and intelligence work and police and armed forces to handle these things from a security point of view. But I think that the GMM offers the opportunity for, and what we saw in the Arab Spring, for instance, are ways for people to improve their lots without resorting to these desperate, violent, extremist measures. And I think that's when we will really, that's when we can really say we put this era behind us, and we're not quite there yet.
So do you really think that the Al-Qaeda has declined in its ability to inflict terror on the world?
I think it has, as a result of the collective security measures that many countries have taken. I also think it's declined in its attractiveness to people, primarily because the number of deaths that's been responsible and suffering has been responsible has been so great, and most of them have been Muslim citizens in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere. I think the sort of indiscriminately brutal nature of this particular extremist doctrine has been exposed. So I think that plus good security work by many countries has reduced its capability. But groups like that will have an attractiveness unless moderates can show a better, more reliable, more moral way to right the wrongs, because that's what gives the power to extremists is poverty and injustices and so on.
Inequality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, last year also saw the capture of Osama bin Laden. If he was still alive and you had him in custody, what would you ask him, or what would you say to him?
Yeah, that's a interesting way of thinking about it. I think that somebody like Osama bin Laden is so far over wrapped up in his own righteousness and his own sense of destiny that it'd be difficult to have a conversation with him. And there are always going to be some people like that. I think the people I'd like to have the conversation with are sort of the people who feel attracted to that. Why do they feel that is the right way to take action on injustices and inequality they don't like? What is it about the system that's available in democratic countries, that's available by mass nonviolent movements, that has produced really more results in the past, that is inadequate, and they feel that they have to turn to this really destructive doctrine. I mean, there are always going to be men of violence who are attracted to a fight and a sort of a criminal, hard, brutal element. You see that in almost every armed movement that exists. But it's that next group of people who really have a decision to make between working through moderate means, and they're very effective means that the Arab Spring has shown us that can make change in the world. Why not choose those? Why feel that joining an extremist group that kills a lot of innocent people is right? Those are the questions I'd like to understand better.
Right, to talk to the people that actually have, thinking about joining the group.
Yeah,
but which also leads to the question, when we talk about the global movement of moderates, and they say the key here is to communicate. But groups like Al-Qaeda and Jamaat Islamiyah, do you think they can be reasoned with? Is there room for negotiation? Is there room for communication, I think, is also key, because they tend to cut themselves off from the rest of the world.
Again, I agree with you that the hardcore people who convince themselves of that are probably beyond communication. You're not going to talk them into something. With them, it's a combination of probably some originally sincere motivation, but gradually that's been also overcome by the thrill of power, the thrill of violence, the rush of being involved in that kind of activity. And I think they're sort of beyond the pale. It's that next group that I think communication does make a difference. And I think you have to, as I said in my remarks at the conference today, you have to offer a positive alternative. You can't just lecture them and say, don't believe that. That's wrong, because they say, well, how do I do something about this situation? And that's when I think you have to point to the examples of movements, and throughout history we've seen them, whether it was the civil rights movements in the United States, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi and his movement that gained the freedom of India. Countless groups like that in Eastern Europe, the heroes in Syria who are using that form today. That is, I think, the alternative that you offer to people as a more moral, moderate way to address grievances than picking up guns and suicide vests.
And the other thing that we need to address is the U.S. defense budget, which has been reduced. Do you think this will indirectly affect global stability?
I think that with a war ending, as it is in Iraq, I think that with the general trend of world events, which is that the United States and countries that believe in democracy and free markets and all are not faced by some big existential threat the way that we were during the Cold War. I think under those circumstances, the United States can cover its interests with a smaller budget and still support its friends around the world and work on common problems. So no, I think it's something that will not jeopardize the defense of our interests and those of our friends and allies.
Now, the one thing the U.S. has done is recently is pivot its foreign policy towards the Asia-Pacific region. Is this a sign of things to come?
I think perhaps that pivoted a little bit of public relations in it. I don't think we ever left. I don't think we really are coming back. I think the United States has always been involved and concerned in this in this region, but because of the two wars that we were involved in the Middle East, that tended to take policymakers and leaders' attention, because that's sort of on the front burner all the time. I know that because I served in the administration, that when we talked among ourselves about where American interests were and the areas of the world that were important to us, East Asia was always high. It's just that often there would be some new news coming out of the Middle East that would require people's attention. So I think what we're seeing now is not some massive shift, as it is really a re-emphasis of a pretty consistent policy, and I don't think we should I don't think we should overplay the military aspects of it. I think it's the key to a lot of what's been good in this part of the world has been the steady economic development, which has opened up possibilities for all sorts of countries. And I think that also the United States may have sort of lost some ground in the sympathy with other countries because of the involvement in the Middle East, especially with Muslim countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and so on, in which it seemed that it was the United States versus
the rest of the
Islam
Muslim world
and others. So I think work can be done there. I think work can be done in economic ways, and the military piece of it is pretty stable, and we should remain so.
Unfortunately, despite progress in the economic and foreign policies, military still does sometimes take the attention away from what we could see as more important things. And the one thing that was discussed in some of the people I spoke to over the last couple of days is the movement of troops into northern Australia. And some have predicted that would be the US's way of keeping an eye on China, which is a growing power in Asia. Would you be able to comment on that?
Well, Australia is a long way from China, so I'm not sure that 2,500 Marines in Brisbane is going to signal a resumption of ground hostilities between the United States and China. So I don't think that is in itself a very significant matter. Most of the military chores in this part of the region of concern to the United States are maritime and air, primarily. It has to do with making sure that the seas are used for and the airspace are used for peaceful purposes. That our allies, Japan, Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and Australia can feel safe and not either threatened, much less subject to military force. So I think it's primarily an air and land. I mean, it's primarily an air and sea environment, and I think Marines training in Australia is a good thing. I don't think it's a real decisive maneuver in terms of the U.S. Possible military confrontation with China, which is all revolves around the Taiwan
Right.
and Taiwan scenarios. The the area here in the South China Sea, there's a lot of controversy. Most of it seems stirred up by China's increasing insistence on its interpretation of old maps, and I do wish people would go back to that code of conduct that they negotiated in 2002, which offers a peaceful, moderate way to handle differences, and we've seen examples of that in this part of the world. Malaysia and Thailand having joint economic development down in the Sea of Thailand without prejudicing territorial claims on either side, and it's that sort of thing I think we need, not saber rattling and counting of ships and planes.
Right. Now, the one country that I guess seems to perhaps worry Asia a little bit is North Korea. With the recent, of course, I mean, they have nuclear arms, with the recent change in leadership, with it going to somebody very young and inexperienced. Is there reason to be concerned?
I don't think in an immediate time there is. The North Korean leaders know, and whatever this young new leader thinks, the older generation knows that if they start a serious war on the Korean Peninsula, it's the end of their regime. It's probably end of their personal lives and fortunes, and they are not going to, on purpose, get into that kind of a scrap. Operating below that level of a general war, they do. North Koreans do use this combination of military provocations, like the sinking of the frigate in North Korea, shelling the islands, and then they'll say, "Oh, but I'm ready to negotiate," and they have this sort of pressure attractive game that they've gotten pretty good at over the years. I think more of that will probably continue because there is that continuity in some of the main pillars of North Korean power: the army, the party, and so on. I think we're in a little time here when the new ruler begins to try to assert his own power, and the regents have to decide how much of it they're going to pass on. I think there may be some tension in the system, and maybe at that point the brittleness of the regime will show itself. I think the thing that's been missed in all the discussions of North Korea are just the suffering of the North Korean people. I mean, when the history books are open, it's open and they write about it, I think it's going to be on a scale with the worst that we saw in the Cultural Revolution in China and the gulags in Russia. So many of those people have been killed by starvation or imprisonment and so on. That it's just a human tragedy, and whatever the sort of geopolitical games are, I think it's that terrible suffering of the North Korean people. It's really the story there, and to see this Kim Jong-il honored when he was the butcher who did it all, just makes me angry. I think it's something that should make moderates angry. When you get an extremist like that who's been lived in personal splendor and isolation while having millions or hundreds of thousands of people die. Yeah,
and we see these conflicts, whether it's within the country or within neighbors or as economic rivals, and we still talk a lot about this, world peace. We want world peace. Is this something that you think is eventually within our reach, and how can something like the GMM help?
Yeah, I think if you look at the overall trend of war and peace since let's say the last 100 years, it's pretty positive. I mean, World War II was a terrible, destructive war, but since then the wars have been smaller, less destructive, and then with the end of the Cold War, the scale of conflict in the world has come down. So overall, from a human perspective, there hasn't been as much suffering from from war. And there are pockets of areas of the world which caused terrible suffering in the past. Look at Europe. I mean, Europe plunged us in the last century into two wars with millions of dead, military and civilian, and yet it's hard to conceive of a conflict opening up there.
Right.
Southeast Asia now, was a pretty violent place up to about 1975 with Japanese in World War II, post-colonial wars, and so on. And yet now there's a strong commitment here. So if you look at these pockets, if you look at the overall trend, I think there's reason to be encouraged. There will always be criminals. There will always be rogues. But I think the compelling idea about the global movement for moderates is that if most people in the world who believe in justice and who are tolerant in their attitude towards others, but who are not going to allow violence to get ahead, if they can become the really strong majority, then maybe we can reduce the scope of violence even further, and that's the hope. May sound a little idealistic, but so what?
Yeah.
we ought to shoot for good
There's no
goals.
harm in hope.
No harm in hope and working for that end.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Admiral Brown. It was a
thank
pleasure
you,
speaking
Joanne.
with you.
Good to be here.